Climate activism has become one of the defining political and social movements of the 21st century. In the years 2025-2026, climate strikes, protests, and grassroots organizing continued to shape global conversations about environmental policy, sustainability, and intergenerational responsibility. What began as small youth-led demonstrations in the late 2010s has evolved into a powerful network of activists, researchers, Indigenous leaders, and everyday citizens demanding urgent action on climate change. The modern climate strike movement traces its roots to the Fridays for Future initiative launched by Swedish activist Greta Thunberg in 2018. This movement encouraged students to skip school on Fridays to protest government inaction on climate change. Within a few years, it grew into an international campaign that mobilized millions of participants worldwide and forced climate issues into mainstream political debates. By 2025, climate strikes were no longer limited to students. Workers, scientists, and community organizations increasingly joined demonstrations and coordinated local activism. Recent events illustrate the continued strength of the movement. In 2025, thousands of activists gathered outside the COP30 climate summit in Brazil, marching alongside Indigenous communities and environmental defenders to demand stronger commitments from global leaders. Demonstrators carried symbolic props such as giant inflatable earths and banners calling for the protection of ecosystems like the Amazon. Such protests highlight the international nature of climate activism and the growing alliance between environmental groups and Indigenous rights movements. Climate protests have also remained highly visible at the local level. In Vancouver, for example, tens of thousands of people recently gathered for a climate rally, marching across the Cambie Bridge and ending at the Vancouver Public Library Plaza. Participants ranged from high school students to parents and community organizers. These events demonstrate how climate activism continues to bring diverse groups together and transform environmental concerns into visible public action. Scholarly research supports the idea that protests can influence public discourse and policy. A 2025 review of climate activism studies found that demonstrations often increase media attention and encourage politicians to speak more frequently about environmental policy. Other research examining dozens of academic studies shows strong evidence that activism can shift public opinion and increase support for climate-related political parties and initiatives. In this sense, protests function not only as expressions of frustration, but also as tools for shaping democratic decision-making. Grassroots organizing has been especially important in sustaining climate activism. Grassroots movements typically operate outside traditional political institutions and rely on volunteers, community groups, and digital networks to coordinate activities. According to recent academic research, youth-led environmental activism has transformed democratic participation by giving younger generations a stronger voice in political debates. These networks often emphasize inclusivity and intersectionality, highlighting how climate change disproportionately affects marginalized communities. Social media has also played a critical role in modern climate organizing. Platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, and X, formerly Twitter, allow activists to share protest footage, circulate petitions, and mobilize participants in real time. Researchers studying digital environmental movements argue that social media enables digital natives to connect activism with storytelling, viral hashtags, and visual campaigns that spread rapidly across global networks. For example, hashtags such as Choose Fridays for Future, Choose Climate Strike, and Choose Act Now regularly trend during major demonstrations. amplifying the visibility of protests and encouraging broader participation. However, the movement also faces challenges. Critics sometimes argue that protests alone cannot produce structural change, while activists themselves worry about burnout and activism fatigue. Studies show that climate activism can create both empowerment and psychological stress for young people, who often feel intense pressure about the future of the planet. In response, many grassroots groups now emphasize community care, collective leadership, and long-term organizing strategies rather than one-time demonstrations. Despite these challenges, climate protests remain a central feature of environmental politics in 2025 and 2026. Journalists and activists alike note that grassroots organizing has achieved several important victories, demonstrating that ordinary people power can challenge entrenched political and corporate interests. From local city rallies to international summits, climate strikes continue to serve as powerful reminders that citizens, especially younger generations, are demanding a more sustainable future. Ultimately, climate strikes represent more than protests against environmental degradation. They reflect a broader cultural shift toward collective responsibility, civic engagement, and global solidarity. As extreme weather events and environmental risks continue to intensify, grassroots movements are likely to remain at the forefront of public debates about climate action. Whether through marches in city streets, legal challenges in courtrooms, or viral campaigns online, activists are shaping the political landscape of the climate crisis and redefining what it means to participate in democracy. Settings: make the background music fast and energetic. Add classic Hormozy subtitle. Use ISFI as watermark text. Use YouTube audio library. Only use appropriate media. Use my voice for the narrator.